The reason ultra beige is even a term is because of a certain 1977 Chevrolet Monte Carlo that I bought kind of as a very, very random, circuitous type of deal. A good friend of mine from church asked if I could help appraise part of his aunt's estate. They had a couple cars that they needed disposed of as part of this, but they had to appraise everything before it went through probate, et cetera, et cetera. I said, yeah, no problem. Happy to help. They had a 1957 Chevy Bel Air and a 1977 Monte Carlo. So I wrote an appraisal for him at, reasonable wholesale value. After a few months, his mom, who was handling everything, asked, well, do you want to buy these cars? So I did. I went out and checked them out, and the Bel Air was fantastic, and the Monte Carlo was mediocre, as I kind of expected. But it was really cool because his great aunt was the original owner of this thing. And if ever a car that nobody cared about the provenance had provenance, this was it. Like literally nobody gave a crap how many miles were on it, or, who the original owner was, or how many owners, or all the questions you usually get asked. It was a beige on beige on beige, two-tone, friggin' skin tone brown over leggings brown. It was disgusting. And it had the Landau roof and everything. The only thing it didn't have, which was the question I got asked more than anything else, was, did it have the swivel seat? My goodness, if I get $1 for every time I got asked that question, I would have paid for the build. But anyway, they had a scrapbook for the car, the original witness sticker, photos of them taking delivery new. Like, it was this really cool story for a car that nobody cared about the story. But I thought it was cool anyway. So I sold the Bel Air, made a decent profit, and my effective cost on the Monte Carlo was like $500. And I don't think it was really worth a whole lot more than that. It was kind of a quirky car, so I said, I should figure out what to do with this. And I thought about racing lemons, and I said, well, it is actually too nice for lemons. So what else could I do with it? And around that time, I discovered the C2C Express, which was an underground Cannonball group that did cross-country races in old, mostly dilapidated cars to kind of relive or do a tribute to the original 70s Cannonballs. And the rules were typically that the cars had to have a starting cost of under $3,000, i.e. like before you went and built it out and did modifications. And they had to be older than 1980 with some exceptions. I said, okay, well, this one would fit. I could make this work. I said, the motor's got to go. 148 horsepower ain't going to cut it. So I bought a LS1 engine with, it was out of a Trans Am. So it had a 4L60 transmission, which everybody on the internet will immediately know how this story is going to end. And then, of course, I couldn't put an LS in it without updating the suspension. And I couldn't put more power in it without updating the brakes. So I set a budget of about like $20K for the build. Because again, the cap was a $3,000 purchase price, but there's no limit on what you did beyond that. Also, I figured, well, this is probably what everybody else is doing, right? When you go racing, you race to win. It's competitive, and everybody's exploiting the rules and the loopholes to the furthest extent possible, because if you ain't cheating when you're racing, you ain't racing. I found out that was definitely not the case, but the initial $20,000 budget for the build was far exceeded. I had a really good mechanic, but a young guy who was not excellent at time or project management building it. So it was, I don't want to say an emotional roller coaster because that's being dramatic about a car build, but it was pretty dang stressful, and it consumed a lot of time because I was down at his shop a few times a week trying to manage this and make sure the build came together the way it was supposed to. The day before we were supposed to leave for the run, he brought the car up, it's done. And I drove it. I'm like, nope, it's not done. This car feels unsafe. It is not good. Like, sorry, not going to make the race. And I was pretty disheartened because I had poured a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of emotions into this. It probably had taken a few hours off the end of my life and a few hairs off the back of my head. I was like, whatever, I'll just take a newer car and I won't be eligible and I'll just run with everybody just to drive across the country. And at this point, I had not done any sort of Cannonball at all. This was like my first foray into this world. It was something I had always wanted to do, knew about, dreamed about, but didn't know who did it or how to get into it. So I was very, very excited to, start cannonballing. And I had built this sweet outlaw pro touring, whatever, Monte Carlo that even though it was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in terms of making a large boat of a car be a good cross-country race car, something it never was designed to do, it kind of ended up looking pretty cool. I embraced the ultra beige theme, and I got a set of gold Hurst wheels and had antennas all over it and big fog lights, and it looked kind of sweet. Like it could have actually run a Cannonball in the 70s. Long story short, the car came back the next day and he fixed everything I told him to fix. And it was actually like pretty decent, ready to go. Felt really good on the highway. 120 miles an hour. That thing was comfortable. I don't think it ever exceeded 70 miles an hour in its past life with the original owners, nor was it supposed to. So we got to New York, met everybody. I think it broke down on the way there. Stuff stopped working. So my builder drove out in a pinch and brought parts and overnighted parts from Summit. And we were working on it at the starting line. Got it sort of ready to go enough. And we barreled across the first third of the country until Indiana, and everything was going pretty well until our transmission blew up. Cue the whatever womp womp Captain Obvious music that everybody knew was coming because we had a 4L60. So we rented a car, a Hyundai Accent, and finished the race after an overnight stay and a couple hours broken down, ironically, in a transmission shop parking lot is where we left the car. I left him a note saying, please don't fix my car. The keys are in it because I was okay with somebody stealing it, and I'll come for it later. But anyway, we finished the race in a Hyundai Accent, and I think we were like low 40s from New York to San Francisco, even with an overnight stop. So we're reasonably proud of that. And we were proud that we didn't give up. We kind of maintained the Cannonball spirit. We had broken down close enough to home. We could have just gone home, called it. But we said, nope, we are finishing this no matter what. And we didn't finish last. So the next year, after another year of torture and 3 times a week spent with my builder and ungodly amounts more money. Again, I had set my cap at 20 grand, but like, it's kind of like you start something, you can't stop it when it's not finished because then it's completely worthless. You've thrown all that money away. So I had to throw more money away just to recover some of what I had put into it. So we fixed all the crap that we thought was wrong from the last run. We got a fully built transmission, still a 4L60. So you all know how this is going to end. And we made it to New York once again to make an incredibly long journey. Well, the journey was 33 hours and 33 minutes. I'll tell the story of that in about 30 seconds. But we were very, very fast for most of the country. Our average speed was over 90 miles an hour. We were going to set all kinds of records for competitive events, for vintage cannonballs. We were on track to beat Alex Roy's time that he had done in his M5 with spotter planes, et cetera, et cetera. And we were going to do it with an old friggin' boat that belonged to somebody's great aunt, nicknamed Ultra Beige. But we had fuel system issues, vapor lock in the middle of New Mexico. And what was a 30-second fix took 2.5 hours to diagnose and actually fix. Not proud of that, but yeah, we tried everything we thought it would be. We replaced the fuel pump, and all sorts of other things. And I was really hoping that there was a fuel leak somewhere and it would catch on fire because it was insured very well by Haggerty. But unfortunately, it didn't. And we got back on the road and we thought we were completely out of it. And I was really frustrated because I was like, man, we're going to win this race. Like, I'm going to prove myself in Cannonball World. And Ed texted me and said, hey, how far out are you guys? Because here's the fastest time. And if you average whatever, like, I think you can still make it. So we had a little bit of renewed hope after the heartbreak of being on the side of the road for hours. And we put the pedal down and we ended up making it. And we won the race by about 20 minutes. So Ultra Beige kind of redeemed herself. But I still had a love-hate relationship with that because even though we got a victory, it was an incredibly painful victory, incredibly expensive, not intentional. And of course, it kind of gave me a reputation of, well, he's the guy that just overbuilt his car and spent way too much money to come out and buy this race, which was not intentional at all. One, I thought that's what everybody was doing. Two, I started with a $500 car and a $2,500 motor thinking, ooh, this is how I'm going to do this on the cheap. And then everything went wrong. So took it to some other events. Then Arnie and I were going to run in 2019. And we decided, well, let's run Ultra Beige again, sort out more of the issues, make it more reliable. And we made it to Colorado and she broke down again, this time with vapor lock issues in the fuel system, but not the same issue because I thought, I know how to fix this in 30 seconds. But it wasn't a venting problem this time. It was a mystery problem that basically never got solved because half an hour later, fired up again and was fine. So anyway, we did not finish that race, and Ultra Beige was once again on my I hate this car list. Love, hate, love, hate. Definitely finished on the hate. But I kept it around and, took it to some, Cannonball reunion events and stuff. And it was fun to take to shows and it was a cool looker and it sounded great. Then I finally got tired of it and decided to auction it off. And out of the probably 50 grand that I put into this car, which is painful to think about, it sold for a whopping, I think, 13 grand to my good friend John Ficarra. $12,904. And to somewhat ease the pain of doing this, I decided to donate the entire amount to charity because then I couldn't be like, oh, well, I lost 40 grand on this. I could just say, all right, the whole thing was a write-off and somehow make myself feel better about it. But to this date, it is probably one of the worst, if not the worst, financial decisions I've made in my entire life. And I wasn't the only one that lost out on Ultra Beige because after selling it to Ficarra, he decided to road trip it home. And what do we say about that fully built 4L60? Well, there's enough memes on the internet about that transmission. I'm not going to make any more or attempt to make the joke, but yep, it let go on him on the way home. And Ultra Beige was once again where she was most comfortable, on the side of the road. It was a good learning experience for myself. It was good training. And ultimately, what we did with that car gained the respect of other cannonballers, most notably Arnie, who I had been kind of trying to get on his team because I knew one or the other of us would probably make a run at the overall record. And again, if you can't beat him, why join him? I thought we could do it better together. So that kind of proved to Arnie, hey, Doug is serious about this Cannonball stuff and sort of knows what he's doing, not with building cars, but with planning a run and driving. And so that was, I guess I have to look back on it as a net positive because it was a good stepping stone.
For a limited time, Glossett's best ever DIY ceramic coating deal is back. Last year, too many of you ordered it and it broke his site for a little while. But now, just the first 2,000 of you can get Glossett's $150 bottle of graphene ceramic coating for just $69.99, and you get a free $50 bottle of their ceramic detail spray, which makes the application a breeze. So click right now at the link in the description below to get yours.